From the Presidential Palace, Manila, Dateline Malacañang.
Good day. Radio Pilipinas World Service can also be heard on shortwave broadcast through the shortwave facilities of the United States Agency for Global Media or Voice of America on the following shortwave frequencies: 15.640 MHz, 17.750 MHz, and 21.720 MHz. I'm your host, Leo Magpayo, and this is Dateline Malacañang in Review. Philippine President Ferdinand R. Marcos Jr. on Monday said the government is now shifting from emergency response to full-scale rehabilitation and relocation in areas devastated by the magnitude 7.8 Mindanao earthquake, even as search and recovery efforts continue in the hardest-hit communities. During a briefing in General Santos City, the president said engineers are assessing hospitals, schools, and government buildings to determine structural safety, while restoring medical services remains a top priority. The president announced 278 million pesos in financial aid for severely affected local government units or LGUs, plus 50 million pesos from the LGSF for repairing damaged facilities. He assured local officials of continued national government support and urged them to immediately relay emerging needs.
We have put aside 278 million for the local governments who have been hit hard by the earthquake. So Sarangani and Jansan will receive 50 million, South Cotabato, Sultan Kudarat 30 million, Davao Occidental and Glan 20 million each, Zamboanga will get 15 million. And those others, yung ibang apektado na lokal na pamahalaan, ay meron pa rin, may pondo pa rin, we can give up to from 3 to 10 million for everyone. Sa ilalim naman ng LGSF, maglalabas tayo ng 50 million kaagad para sa pagpaayos ng mga government building at sa isang ospital kagaya sa Alabel at saka sa Glan. So we will need to use that immediately. Narinig naman ninyo ang DSWD, maayos ang ating supply pagdating sa mga relief goods. At yung mga isolated na lugar, pipilitin natin makapunta. Yung mga ibang barangay na talagang walang madaanan, ay magpapalipad na lang muna tayo ng helicopter. Yung iba, kung pwede, kung kaya sa dagat, gagawin din namin yun. But whatever it takes, kailangan, mahirap, hindi namin kinakalimutan dahil walang pagkain ng mga yan eh. Kaya walang makakain yung mga. Kasi kung meron man silang naitabi, by now nauubos na yan o baka nasira pa sa lindol. Kaya we'll just keep providing. Kagaya ganun nga ang sabi ko, kahit na nag-evacuation center at umalis na sa evacuation center, nakikitira sa kanilang kamag-anak o kaibigan, ay patuloy pa rin ang provide namin ng at least emergency basic goods. At ang DSUD, kagaya na nabanggit ni Sec, is magbibigay ng 30,000 cash assistance sa mga totally destroyed na residences. Ang DPWH na ay yun mga inuuna rin yung mga tulay, Malapatan, yung sa Pumasla, yung Sarangani, Davao del Sur, Coastal Road, sa Glan din. Yung mga isolated barangay, karamihan may access na, pero may mga sityo pa raw. So yun ang titiyakin natin, pipilitin natin na makarating ang mga relief goods.
Reopening access routes is also a major focus. Key roads and the Sapu-Masla Bridge are being cleared with helicopters and sea transport on standby for isolated areas. The Department of Public Works and Highways, or DPWH, reported 17 bridges and 11 major roads have reopened. The Department of Social Welfare and Development, or DSWD, said 44 evacuation centers remain open for more than 4,000 families, with 125,000 food packs distributed and a nationwide stockpile of 4.8 million. The Department of Human Settlements and Urban Development, or DSUD, reports 58,000 homes damaged, including 11,000 totally destroyed, and plans to distribute shelter kits, modular housing, and loan moratoriums. Health authorities report 74 deaths and around 1,600 injured. Field hospitals, medicines, hygiene kits, and water purification supplies have been deployed to prevent disease outbreaks. The Department of Education said 617 classrooms were totally damaged. Nearly 22 million pesos has been allocated for cleanup and repairs, with flexible learning and temporary learning spaces to support students. Despite the shift to rehabilitation, President Marcos urged residents to stay vigilant, warning that continuing aftershocks still pose serious risks.
Dateline Malacañang.
Philippine President Ferdinand R. Marcos Jr. and Russian President Vladimir Putin are set to hold a bilateral meeting in Kazan, Russia, where food and energy security are expected to take center stage. The talks will happen on the sidelines of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, Russia Commemorative Summit on June 17 and 18. In a press briefing Monday, ASEAN 2026 Philippines spokesperson and Department of Foreign Affairs, or DFA Assistant Secretary Dominic Xavier Imperial said the meeting coincides with the 50th anniversary of Philippine-Russia diplomatic relations. Imperial noted that both leaders are expected to focus on food security and energy cooperation, areas of mutual concern as global supply chains remain volatile. He added that President Marcos and Putin will also exchange views on regional and international developments affecting global food and energy markets. The bilateral meeting will take place as President Marcos, serving as ASEAN chair, co-chairs the commemorative summit with Putin to mark 35 years of ASEAN-Russia dialogue relations. According to the DFA, the summit will review the progress of the ASEAN-Russia strategic partnership and discuss cooperation in energy, food security, science and technology, trade and investment, tourism, education, cultural exchanges, and people-to-people ties. Imperial confirmed that this will be President Marcos's first visit to Russia as president. The summit is also expected to adopt key documents, including the Kazan Declaration 2026 and the ASEAN-Russia Comprehensive Plan of Action 2026 to 2030, which will outline future cooperation. Beyond food and energy, discussions between President Marcos and Putin may also touch on tourism, education, science and technology, and cultural programs as both countries seek to deepen bilateral ties. The Philippines and Russia established diplomatic relations in 1976, marking 50 years of partnership this year.
President Ferdinand R. Marcos Jr., in his capacity as ASEAN chair, will co-chair the summit together with President Vladimir Putin of the Russian Federation. The meeting will bring together the leaders of ASEAN and Russia to commemorate 35 years of dialogue relations and to chart the future direction of this partnership. The ASEAN-Russia Commemorative Summit holds particular significance for the Philippines. It will mark President Marcos's first visit to the Russian Federation as president, set in the midst of the 50 years of diplomatic relations this year between the Philippines and Russia. During the summit, ASEAN leaders and President Putin are expected to review the progress of ASEAN-Russia strategic partnership and discuss ways to further strengthen cooperation in areas of mutual trust, particularly on biosafety and biosecurity, outer space and satellite applications, energy and food security, science and technology, trade and investment, tourism, education, and people-to-people exchanges. The summit is likewise expected to adopt several key outcome documents. These will guide ASEAN-Russia cooperation in the years ahead. These include the Kazan Declaration 2026, which will articulate the shared vision of ASEAN and Russia as we commemorate 35 years of partnership, as well as joint statements on energy and on cultural cooperation. The leaders are also expected to adopt the ASEAN-Russia Comprehensive Plan of Action 2026-2030, which will serve as the principal roadmap for advancing cooperation across the political security, economic, and socio-cultural pillars of the partnership. On the margins of the summit, the President will also hold a bilateral meeting with President Putin. The discussions will center on the commemoration of the 50th anniversary of the establishment of the diplomatic relations between the Philippines and Russia. The meeting will likewise provide an opportunity to explore ways to further strengthen cooperation in areas of mutual interest, particularly energy security and food security. As ASEAN Chair, the Philippines remains committed to strengthening ASEAN's external relations, ensuring that the region's engagement with partners continue to advance ASEAN centrality. And as Chair, the Philippines continues to carry this responsibility, ensuring that the summit yields meaningful and forward-looking outcomes for our peoples.
That was Department of Foreign Affairs Assistant Secretary Dominic Xavier Imperial.
Dateline Malacañang.
Philippine President Ferdinand R. Marcos Jr. on Tuesday welcomed German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier to Malacañang as both leaders reaffirmed their commitment to a rules-based international order and pledged to strengthen cooperation in security, trade, climate action, and maritime affairs. The visit marks the first trip by a German head of state to the Philippines in 63 years. During their bilateral meeting, President Marcos said the Philippines looks forward to expanding cooperation with Germany across a wide range of areas. President Marcos noted that the Philippines and Germany share common views on many of today's major global issues and remain united in addressing challenges that affect international peace and stability.
In our meeting today, Your Excellency, we look forward to discussing with the German delegation the wide array of cooperation between our two countries, both in the bilateral and in the multilateral fields. I am joined here today by the distinguished members of the Cabinet, ready to discuss matters of mutual interest. I hope to take this opportunity to talk to our German friends who are very much like-minded on the important issues of our times, regarding the various challenges to peace being faced by all of us around the globe.
As part, President Steinmeier emphasized a strong alignment between Manila and Berlin on key international concerns. President Steinmeier also revealed that his visit was originally scheduled for March, but had to be postponed due to tensions in the Middle East and the temporary closure of airspace in parts of the Gulf region.
We are defending the rules-based order. We are defending the United Nations, the international law. So therefore, in our positions, we are very close, although geography is sometimes an hurdle. It's long distances, and I was really depressed because you were visiting Germany in 2024. and I couldn't receive you because I myself was abroad in these days. So therefore, finally we are here. Finally we are here after the previous planned visit in March this year had to be postponed because of the conflict and the blocking of the airspace around the Gulf region. So therefore, thank you so much that you found again some space in your calendar to receive us, and thank you for the hospitality in your wonderful country.
According to Malacañang, discussions between the two leaders covered defense cooperation, peace-building efforts, maritime collaboration, trade and investment, climate change, renewable energy, and people-to-people exchanges. The two leaders likewise exchanged views on regional and international developments. The visit comes as the Philippines continue to deepen cooperation with European partners in promoting maritime security and upholding a rules-based international order in the Indo-Pacific region.
Dateline Malacañang.
Also on Tuesday, Philippine President Ferdinand R. Marcos Jr. departed for Kazan to lead the Philippine delegation at the Association of Southeast Asian Nations or ASEAN-Russia Commemorative Summit and hold bilateral talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin. The presidential aircraft carrying President Marcos and his delegation left Villamor Air Base in Pasay City shortly before midnight. In his departure statement, the president said, "The summit marks the 35th anniversary of ASEAN-Russia relations and is particularly significant as it will be his first visit to Russia and coincides with the 50th anniversary of diplomatic relations between Manila and Moscow." The president said ASEAN leaders and President Putin are expected to review decades of cooperation and identify new areas for engagement in the years ahead. Discussions during the summit are expected to focus on peace and security, trade and investment, food and energy security, science and technology, digital transformation, education, tourism, and people-to-people exchanges. On the sidelines of the gathering, President Marcos is also scheduled to hold bilateral talks with President Putin.
As chair of ASEAN, the Philippines is committed to ensuring that this commemorative summit produces substantive and forward-looking outcomes that deepen ASEAN's strategic partnership with Russia and contribute in concrete terms to regional peace, stability, and shared prosperity. Beyond marking our golden anniversary of diplomatic relations, which were formally established on the 2nd of June 1976. Our discussions will focus on concrete areas of mutual interest, particularly energy and food security.
Trip comes at a time when many countries continue to face concerns over energy prices and supply stability amid ongoing geopolitical tensions. President Marcos reiterated the Philippines' commitment to ASEAN unity and regional cooperation under the country's chairmanship of the regional bloc. The ASEAN-Russia Commemorative Summit will be held on June 17 and 18, with participating leaders expected to adopt key documents outlining future cooperation between ASEAN and Russia.
Dateline Malacañang.
Philippine President Ferdinand R. Marcos Jr. and Russian President Vladimir Putin on Wednesday discussed expanding cooperation in food and energy security as both nations marked 50 years of diplomatic relations. The two leaders met in Kazan on the sidelines of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations or ASEAN-Russia Commemorative Summit, where President Marcos is participating as ASEAN Chair. In his opening statement, President Marcos underscored the significance of the meeting. noting that the Philippines and Russia are celebrating 5 decades of formal ties established on June 2, 1976.
It is a particularly significant time for us to be meeting, as this is the 50 years celebration of Philippine-Russian ties. And we welcome the efforts of our respective embassies. Since last year, as they have spearheaded initiatives that celebrated this milestone, and in particular the photo exhibition that was held in Moscow, inaugurated and displayed in the Foreign Ministry in Moscow. We hope to continue our regular conduct of political consultations between our foreign ministries. They provide a very important opportunity to explore further ways of cooperation.
President Marcos also invited Putin to attend the 21st East Asia Summit in Manila this November, saying the forum remains crucial in promoting regional stability and prosperity. The Philippine president acknowledged that while bilateral trade has remained steady, there is substantial room for growth, particularly in sectors identified during last year's Joint Commission on Trade and Economic Cooperation, or JCTEC, meeting in Moscow. Key priorities include energy, food security, and expanded business-to-business partnerships in innovation, retail, cosmetics, food processing, and industrial collaboration.
Speaking as chair of ASEAN, I personally extend my invitation to Your Excellency to attend the 21st East Asia Summit, which is scheduled to take place in Manila next November. The East Asia Summit remains an integral part in maintaining a regional architecture towards our shared goal of a stable, secure, and prosperous region. On the trade and investment relationship between our two countries, again, I would like to thank you for the hospitality and support that was extended to our delegation at the 4th meeting of the Joint Commission on Trade and Economic Cooperation, which was held in Moscow last September. We appreciate the forward-looking exchange and on the different structural issues that affect the trade between our two countries. And as you have mentioned, Your Excellency, there are many potential areas that I think that's still open to explore. And I think that the present level of trade, although it is steady, I think that there is a great deal more that we can do. We note that during the JCTEC meeting held in Moscow, energy and food security emerged as one of the mutual priorities of both our countries. And that is why that B2B component at the sidelines of the JCTEC enabled Philippines and Russia to establish networks and to explore joint ventures. We note that a number of memoranda of understanding that were signed during this activity covered cooperation in innovation, retail products, cosmetics, food processing, and industrial collaboration.
That was Philippine President Ferdinand R. Marcos Jr.
Dateline Malacañang.
Philippine President Ferdinand R. Marcos Jr. on Thursday announced the adoption of key outcome documents as the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN-Russia Commemorative Summit, wrapped up in Kazan, setting the direction for the next phase of ASEAN-Russia cooperation. Among the documents endorsed were the Kazan Declaration 2026, the ASEAN-Russia Comprehensive Plan of Action 2026 to 2030, and joint statements with concept papers on cultural cooperation and energy cooperation. President Marcos said these form a comprehensive roadmap that will guide practical collaboration and deliver concrete benefits to the peoples of Southeast Asia and Russia. Speaking alongside Russian President Vladimir Putin at the Kazan Expo, President Marcos, who co-chaired the summit as ASEAN chair, welcomed Moscow's continued support for ASEAN centrality and the ASEAN-led regional architecture. The president said both sides are committed to ensuring that the momentum from the Kazan summit results in meaningful on-the-ground cooperation. He noted that discussions reaffirmed shared priorities across political, security, economic, and socio-cultural pillars. Leaders also tackled efforts to promote peace and stability, boost trade and investment, strengthen food and energy security, advance science and technology partnerships, and expand people-to-people exchanges. President Marcos added that developments in the wider Eurasian region were reviewed, including opportunities for deeper engagement between ASEAN and organizations such as the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and the Eurasian Economic Union. The Philippine president said ASEAN and Russia recognize the potential for expanded cooperation in areas like economic connectivity, agriculture, tourism, energy, and addressing transnational challenges. This year marks 35 years of ASEAN-Russia dialogue relations, with both sides reaffirming their commitment to a constructive and forward-looking partnership.
We noted the growing interaction between ASEAN and these organizations and recognized the potential for enhanced cooperation in areas of mutual interest, including economic connectivity, trade and investment, energy, agriculture, tourism, and addressing transnational challenges. We likewise welcome the adoption of several important outcome documents that will guide the next phase of ASEAN-Russia relations. These include the Kazan Declaration 2026, ASEAN-Russia Unity and Diversity 35 Years Together, the ASEAN-Russia Comprehensive Plan of Action for 2026 to 2030, the Joint Statement and Concept Paper on Cultural Cooperation, and the Joint Statement and Concept Paper on Energy Cooperation. Together, these documents provide a comprehensive roadmap for expanding practical cooperation and delivering tangible results and benefits to our peoples in the years to come. As ASEAN Chair, the Philippines welcomes Russia's continued engagement with ASEAN and its support for ASEAN centrality and the ASEAN-led architecture. We remain committed to ensuring that the momentum generated at the summit translates into concrete outcomes and meaningful cooperation.
As Philippine President Ferdinand R. Marcos Jr.
Dateline Malacañang.
Meanwhile, Philippine President Ferdinand R. Marcos Jr. outlined the priorities he believes should guide Association of Southeast Asian Nations or ASEAN-Russia cooperation in the years ahead as both sides mark 35 years of dialogue relations. Speaking in Kazan, where he co-chairs the ASEAN-Russia Commemorative Summit with President Vladimir Putin, President Marcos said the partnership is anchored on mutual respect, shared interests, and the conviction that cooperation, not confrontation, is the surest path to peace. The President identified three core priorities for the next phase of engagement: peace, security, and stability, a more dynamic economic partnership, and stronger people-to-people ties. On security, President Marcos called for deeper collaboration on maritime security and counterterrorism, stronger defenses against cyber threats, and more proactive regional mechanisms to address illicit trafficking, cybercrime, and online scams. The chief executive stressed that food and energy security must be prioritized, describing them as essential foundations for regional stability. He also highlighted the need to support micro, small, medium enterprises and emerging sectors to ensure inclusive growth. On people-to-people cooperation, the President emphasized expanding scholarships, student exchanges, academic partnerships, tourism, and cultural programs, calling these the living core of ASEAN-Russia relations. He said youth must be placed at the center of these initiatives as they will shape the future of the partnership. As ASEAN chair, President Marcos reaffirmed the Philippines' commitment to turning the summit's momentum into concrete outcomes and welcomed Russia's continued support for ASEAN centrality and the ASEAN-led regional framework.
As we mark this milestone, the Philippines would like to highlight three priorities that should animate our cooperation in the years ahead. First, peace, security, and stability. In an era of deepening geopolitical uncertainty, the value of steady political and security engagement between ASEAN and Russia cannot be overstated. Transnational threats such as terrorism, illicit trafficking, cybercrime, and online scams do not respect borders, and neither can our responses. We must strengthen practical cooperation on maritime security and counter-terrorism, reinforce our collective resilience in cyberspace, and develop the institutional habits of anticipation rather than mere reaction. Second, a more dynamic economic partnership. Our trade and investment ties have grown, but they have yet to reach full potential. We must be more deliberate and more ambitious in expanding economic opportunities, improving trade facilitation, deepening investment flows, and connecting our business communities. Food and energy security deserve a particular attention, as these are the foundations on which broader stability rests. Our economic cooperation must also be inclusive. Our micro, small, and medium enterprises must have a place in this partnership, and our cooperation must extend into the emerging sectors that will shape tomorrow's global economy. And third, perhaps the most enduring, is our people. Scholarships, student exchanges, academic partnerships, tourism, and the arts. These are not peripheral to our relationship. They are at its living core. The connections forged between our peoples outlast any summit declaration and carry our partnership forward in ways that policy alone cannot do. We must continue to invest in these bonds, placing our youth not merely at the receiving end of this cooperation, but at its center, as the generation that will ultimately decide what ASEAN-Russia relations will become.
That was Philippine President Ferdinand R. Marcos Jr.
Dateline Malacañang.
Philippine President Ferdinand R. Marcos Jr. announced on Friday that the 24 Filipinos detained in Russia for 9 months have been ordered released and are now set to return home. The development follows President Marcos's bilateral meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Kazan, where he raised the plight of the detained Filipinos who were reportedly victims of illegal recruitment. In a Facebook post, President Marcos thanked Putin and the Russian government for acting on the matter. The Filipinos were reportedly detained in 2025 after being brought into Russia through illegal recruitment schemes. Speaking to reporters before flying back to Manila, the chief executive said Putin was initially unaware of the situation but immediately expressed concern and ordered Russian authorities to look into the case. He said officials were able to locate the detainees and verify that no charges had been filed against them despite their prolonged detention. President Marcos recalled that during a dinner after their meeting, Putin assured him that Russia would resolve the issue. The chief executive confirmed that the group is scheduled for deportation and repatriation.
I don't know if people are aware of this, but 24 Filipinos have been in detention in Irkutsk for how many months now? 9 months. Wala tayong balita, hindi natin malaman kung ano ng kalagayan nila. As far as we know, hindi naman sila nakasuhan. Pero wala tayong makuha masyadong information hanggang ngayon. Nung nag-bilateral meeting kami ni President Putin, binanggit ko ito. At nagulat din siya. Sabi niya, hindi ko alam yan. Pag-aaralan namin, tignan namin ang nangyayari. Nung dinner kagabi, kinausap niya ako, sabi niya, nakita na namin yung sitwasyon. We found out where the 24 Filipinos are. We found out what the problem is with their case, with their situation. And first of all, he said, they have not been charged with any wrongdoing, but they have still been kept in detention for 9 months. So I said, as a request, especially speaking for the families, kung pwede naman, we can find a way that they be we get some information about them. Unang-una. Pangalawa, na makahanap naman tayo ng resolution. Siyempre, respetado natin ang batas ng Russia, respetado natin ang kanilang pamahalaan. Ngunit, kung may paraan, sana magawa natin. And ginawa niya na paraan. Sabi niya, I remember the last thing he said last night after we were talking about it. He said, don't worry, we will find a way. We will find a way to fix this problem. And now, the 24 Filipinos will be released. They are ready for deportation tomorrow by 5 p.m. So those 24 will be going home, back to the Philippines, and back to their families.
That was Philippine President Ferdinand R. Marcos Jr.
Dateline Malacañang.
And finally, Philippine President Ferdinand R. Marcos Jr. highlighted the key outcomes of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, Russia Commemorative Summit in Kazan, where he served as co-chair alongside Russian President Vladimir Putin. In his statement before departing for Manila, President Marcos said the gathering, held to mark 35 years of ASEAN-Russia relations, allowed regional leaders and President Putin to take stock of their partnership and set a clear direction amid what he described as an increasingly complex global environment. The president reported that discussions covered major regional and international developments, including the South China Sea and the situation in the Middle East, as well as efforts to strengthen cooperation on issues directly affecting the stability and prosperity of ASEAN communities. He emphasized that ASEAN and Russia reaffirmed the need to deepen practical cooperation against terrorism, transnational crime, cybercrime, and other non-traditional security threats, while sustaining engagement across all ASEAN community pillars. President Marcos announced that the summit produced several key outcome documents that will guide the next phase of the partnership. He added that the summit also underscored the growing interconnections across Eurasia. President Marcos held constructive engagements with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and the Eurasian Economic Union, including the Eurasian Economic Commission, covering cooperation in trade and investment, energy, security, connectivity, agriculture, tourism, and responses to transnational challenges.
I have just concluded my participation in the ASEAN-Russia Commemorative Summit in Kazan, Russia, where I served as co-chair alongside President Vladimir Putin. The summit marked the 35th anniversary of ASEAN-Russia relations and offered a timely opportunity for ASEAN leaders and President Putin to take stock of our partnership and chart a course forward amidst an increasingly complex global environment. We exchanged views on significant regional and international developments, including the South China Sea and, of course, the situation in the Middle East. We also discussed ways to strengthen cooperation in areas that bear directly on the stability, resilience, and prosperity of our peoples. Our discussions reaffirmed the importance of deepening practical cooperation on shared security challenges such as terrorism, transnational crime, cybercrime, and other non-traditional threats, as well as sustaining ASEAN Russia engagement across all community pillars through our existing mechanisms. The summit developed several key outcome documents that will shape the next chapter of our strategic partnership. These include the Kazan Declaration 2026, ASEAN-Russia, Unity in Diversity, 35 Years Together. This articulates our shared vision for the future. The ASEAN-Russia Joint Statement on Cultural Cooperation and on Energy Cooperation, and the ASEAN's Russia Comprehensive Plan of Action 2026 to 2030, which serves as the principal roadmap for cooperation across the political, security, economic, and socio-cultural pillars over the next 5 years. Our discussions also underscore the growing interconnections of regional processes across Eurasia. In this spirit, I had constructive engagements with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and the Eurasian Economic Union, including through the Eurasian Economic Commission, covering inter-regional dialogue and practical cooperation in trade and investment, energy, security, connectivity, agriculture, tourism, and addressing transnational challenges.
That was Philippine President Ferdinand R. Marcos Jr.
Dateline Malacañang.
Before we conclude our program, Radyo Pilipinas World Service of the Presidential Broadcast Service can be heard over the following shortwave frequencies: 15.640 MHz, 17.750 MHz, and 21.720 MHz. Radyo Pilipinas World Service is also live on audio streaming. Just download Evox PBS Receiver on your Google Play Store or the App Store from your Apple phone. You can also visit our Facebook page and YouTube channel. Just type in and search for Radyo Pilipinas World Service. Kindly subscribe, like, and share our post as well. And that concludes this edition of Dateline Malacañang in Review. For Radyo Pilipinas World Service, this is Leo Magpayo. Good day and stay safe.
From the Presidential Palace, Manila, Dateline Malacañang.